Good morning. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about Dogen Zenji's 8 awarenesses of great beings. So Dogen Zenji was the founder of Soto Zen Buddhism, the type of Buddhism that we practice. And the 8 awarenesses of great beings were his last teaching that he gave before he died. And it's based on the last teaching of the Buddha, the last teaching the Buddha gave before he died. And as we prepare to recognize the Buddha's final nirvana, or his passing from this life, on February the 15th, I thought this would be a good lecture series to do. This is also the chant that we do, not really a chant, but the thing that we read for people in Japan as they're transitioning from life to death. It's called the pillow chant. They call it the mokorakyo. It's considered really helpful for people during the transition to hear these 8 awarenesses of great beings. They're very simple in some ways. When I first started this series, I thought, wow, I wonder what I'm going to talk about. And then you find that there's so much depth to them, and it's so beautiful to hear. So just to review, we talked about the first awareness of great beings is having few desires. The second is knowing satisfaction, true satisfaction. The third is knowing tranquility or deep silence. And today we're going to talk about diligent effort. So what is diligent effort? And as you might remember, the word for great beings, which is a word for Buddha, which means awakened one as well, is also the same as the word for, if you read it in an everyday sense rather than a Buddhist sense, it's the same, looks the same as the word for adults. So how do we become true Dharma adults? How do we grow up in a spiritual sense, not just a physical sense? It's a very different task than growing up physically. And it takes a lot of work, and in particular, diligence. So I'll start by reading the passage from Dogen. The Buddha said, "If you monks practice diligence, nothing will be difficult. For this reason, you should practice diligence. As a trickle of water that constantly flows is able to drill through rock. If the mind of a practitioner often tires and quits, that's like a person twirling a stick to start a fire and resting before it gets hot. Although the person wishes to obtain fire, fire is unobtainable. This is called diligence." So again, as a trickle of water that constantly flows is able to drill through rock. The mind of the practitioner often tires and quits. And when we do this, it's like twirling a stick to start a fire and resting before it gets hot. Although the person wishes to obtain fire, fire is unobtainable. And this is called diligence. This is what I'll talk about today. So how do we keep going? How do we keep going when things are hard, basically? How do we keep going when things are hard? And we have to find ways to convince ourselves to do this, both through an understanding of the benefit of keeping going, as well as the understanding of what happens when we don't keep the energy going. So it's good to remember this sometimes. So first of all, there are the things we can remind ourselves of. The arising, we can avoid the arising of unwholesome states of mind. So we know through our own practice the benefit of this, because we know how uncomfortable it is for us when uncomfortable states of mind come up. So when we're frustrated, when we're just bored, when we're irritable, when we feel that edge that we call suffering. So the edge is that things are not okay feeling that takes us away from our natural, what Tsoknyi Rinpoche calls our okayness, which is our basic goodness or our Buddha nature. So our Buddha nature is our birthright. It's our natural state. And yet we're always pulled out of it by our craving or the things that we want. This sort of a dis-ease that's called suffering. As you might remember, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, that suffering is this sense of not okayness. It is in the world. We suffer because we grab onto things. The cessation of suffering is possible by letting go and by following the path. So the Buddha laid out a path for us to follow as practitioners. And it's a really, it covers all bases. One aspect of the path is meditation practice, which we've just practiced today. It's just one aspect. The other aspects are basically, how are we going to be in the world? How are we going to be with people? How are we going to show up to our life? How are we going to treat our friends, our family, even the people we don't like? Are we doing work that's meaningful and helpful in the world? And are we making efforts? So waking up doesn't happen accidentally. We have to really decide that we want that and then apply the effort to do that. And so coming back to today's teaching, starting with avoiding the things that are not helpful to us. Sometimes we can see this more easily, in just concrete things. So if you think about, so many of us during the month of December tend to eat more than usual, and many people tend to drink more than usual. Maybe you're getting together with family, it's a celebration, it's a feast. It comes at different times for different people, but then January comes along and all of a sudden everybody's in the gym. And then you have something called dry January, right? Where nobody's drinking because they're like, whoa, I did too much. So understanding what it feels like to go into unwholesome states propels us to take on the other side of it. Oh, I don't really like the way I feel. I feel too heavy. I'm gained a lot of weight. I don't feel good in my body. So I'm going to avoid those unwholesome states. So we know what that's like in our bodies and in our lives. So how do we do that in our practice? We learn the ruts that we get into just through doing it. We learn the ruts that we get into, and we start to understand, that's one of my ruts. That's one of my habits that I take on. How can I pull back from that? So the second aspect of diligence is overcoming unwholesome states when they come up. We've just been sitting Zazen practice, and we sit, we put our body in place, we let our breath settle into our lower belly, and we follow our breath. Very simple, and yet so hard to do. Why? Because immediately our mind kicks in and our thoughts get really active. And pretty soon, even though we've made all this effort to get here and to do this practice, we've woken up early in the morning, we've made it here, if we've traveled to be here, pretty soon we're kind of edgy. Like, why am I here? Why did I do this? I could be at home in bed. It's cold. I don't, and so this is something that we have to get over. In terms of diligence, I often think about, as many of you know, I really like doing pilgrimage. So I think about pilgrimage a lot because it's a way that my body and my feet have enacted the same exact things that happen when we're sitting in silence. You start walking and you're so excited. Things are going to be good. I'm walking this pilgrimage. I did one it takes 45 days, and it goes through the most beautiful countryside. It's in Japan, and it circles one of the islands. There are mountains, there are cities, there are country paths, there's beaches. And you start off, everybody's so excited, and you got your stuff and you're setting off up the mountain path, and you go to the first temples because you're stopping off at temples along the way, and it feels so great. It's exciting. You're going to do the chanting at the temples and then move on. And then you come up to the first mountain. It's on the way to temple number 11. And it's very steep. And I remember going up this mountain, really beautiful day, and so many people, and just felt like I felt pulled along by the energy of the people. And then I stopped off around midway and had a little lunch. And then I found it was hard to pick up again. Like I didn't want to keep going. And then the people came along, and I'm like, okay, if they're doing it, I can do it too. This is one of the benefits of practicing together. It helps us find that diligence again. So I got up and I joined. And then I felt really tired. It was hard, just up, 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 up. Sort of by myself for a while. And a woodcutter came out of the forest. Sometimes in the forest there are these roads. So he had parked his truck up there, and you could see he was gathering wood. And he saw me coming up the path, just, huffing and puffing. And he reached into his bag and he gave me juice and a rice ball. And I think it was probably his own lunch that he gave me. But there's a rule on pilgrimage that when somebody makes you an offering, you must take it. And so I took it with so much gratitude. Who gives you their own lunch? So lovely and so amazing. And then again, I felt buoyed. I felt some energy from that and was able to keep going. And this is how it goes. Sometimes we're propelled by our own efforts and our own motivations. We're like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And this is great. And I feel good. And then sometimes we get really tired. And when we get tired, we can be tempted to, stay in bed or stay home or even quit. And then we really are open. Then someone else comes along and helps us. Or maybe just the universe opens to us. There were so many times when I was walking, I would become really tired, or maybe my feet hurt. I had a really bad blister on my right foot that kept coming and going. And you would just feel like, oh, I can't do this. And I would come around a bend and I would be met with the most beautiful view, maybe of the ocean sparkling or a field of flowers. And that also gave me more energy. And then other times there were these just shooting stars of a woodcutter giving me his own lunch, completely unexpected. And if I hadn't been on the path, continuously moving, he wouldn't have had the chance to practice the generosity of supporting me, and I wouldn't have had the chance to practice the generosity of receiving the gift. When we keep going, it allows everything to keep going. So everyone else's practice is also dependent on our own practice. When we're having hard times, we can really lean in to the energy of others and the energy of the universe. And when we're having more energy, rather than going out and just, I'm not suffering today, I'm going to have fun, we can bring that buoyancy in and help others. And this is how we get through this, by all working together. Avoiding the arising of unwholesome states, things that we know are going to not help us. And then when those things come up, getting past them. And then as we do that, we start to develop helpful things, helpful habits or helpful states. And once we develop the habit of simply showing up, maybe I won't say simply, because sometimes it's quite hard. But once we develop the habit of showing up for others and for ourselves, of just, getting to practice sitting on the cushion, doing the practice regularly, once we develop that habit, then it's here for us. And that becomes our way of life, rather than those things that were so unhelpful. So this is how diligence really helps us to transform our life. Just like the rock, the trickle of water that constantly flows is able to drill through a rock. If we just see the water and the place where the water runs, or the hole that the water's made in the rock, it seems like a miracle, right? Whoa, how did water do that? But when we really think about the process and the diligent effort of the water over so much time, then we can understand how much went into that hole through the rock. Not like a great force, it didn't break it. It didn't just come in and smash the rock, but a trickle of water over time was able to drill through the rock. This is diligent effort. I'm going to pause and share another translation of the same passage. The fourth awakening is diligent effort. It is to engage ceaselessly in wholesome practices. This is why it's called diligent effort. It is refinement without mixing in other activities. You keep going forward without turning back. The Buddha said, "Monks, if you make diligent effort, nothing is too difficult. That's why you should do it. It's like a thread of water piercing through a rock by constantly dripping. If your mind continues to slacken, It's like taking a break from hitting stones before they spark. You can't get fire that way. What I am speaking of is diligent effort. We don't really make fires by rubbing sticks together anymore. How many people have ever done that? Or at least tried to do that? I mean, of course I tried that as a child. Maybe we saw it on TV and especially cartoons. But I remember trying that as a child and getting to the point where some smoke came out. You know, getting to the point, rubbing, and so a little bit of smoke's coming. And then you get really tired. And it takes a long time. And as soon as you stop, the smoke stops and there's no fire and you have to start all over again. So you have to kind of begin once again. Has anyone here ever succeeded in making that kind of fire? No? I'm looking at a bunch of New Yorkers too. So maybe if we're out in the wilds of Wyoming or something, we might have a different answer.
From the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. But you know the principle. It's that we have to keep going. And kind of at exactly that moment where we really just want to quit is the most important place to keep going. Coming back to walking on pilgrimage, I found that it was really it was impossible to predict the days. Some days felt like they were going to be the most beautiful day ever. And they were beautiful days. And for some reason, the blister got really bad on that day. And it was really hard to get to the place I thought I was going to get to. Other days seemed like they were going to be really hard. And maybe somebody would come and walk along with me and talk with me. And before I knew it, I was at the place. So unpredictable. Just walking next to someone and sharing your story, because people do that all the time on pilgrimage. They come up, what brings you here? They all want to know. Who are you? Where do you come from? Why are you doing this pilgrimage? And you share these stories and you get to know people you never would have met. And you get to know their most personal stories because people do pilgrimage for all kinds of reasons. You know, often for healing. So you meet people who have been sick. Often to honor someone who has died. So then you hear about their loved one who's died. Sometimes they do pilgrimage for because they like hiking. And then you get to know about them. But you never know. Some days I would think, oh, today's been so hard. Tomorrow I'm going to have an easy day. I'm going to just go a short distance. And then I would find that there wasn't really a place to stay a short distance away, and I'd be like, oh, whatever, you know, I'll just keep going another 10 kilometers. It'll be okay. And it was okay. And then other days I would plan on, you know, walking really, really, really far, and the place I was going to stay didn't work out, or maybe it started to rain and I needed to stop earlier. Making diligent effort requires creating the intention and keeping the intention to keep going, not knowing what the circumstances are going to be. Every time we sit down for zazen, we don't know what our mind's going to do. We don't know what the circumstances around us are going to be like. We just keep showing up and keep doing it. Some days we feel really sad and we don't even know why. And other days we just sit down and it feels so easy. It's not really predictable. And the more we just show up, the wider we get, the more accepting we get of whatever comes up. Those hard days are just, okay, today was kind of hard. And those easy days are like, okay, today was okay. Today wasn't so hard. And then we stop thinking about it, and all the days start to blend together into one flow of practice. And then it's not just the practice of sitting and zazen, but also through our life as we go to work, as we interact with our families, as we meet people we don't like. That also becomes part of the flow. So we're not really going, we talked 2 weeks ago about finding satisfaction. We're not going for a state of constant bliss every day. We're going practicing in order to learn to be present to what is. And the more we are present to what is, the more satisfaction we find. We don't get to this without diligent effort. We have to make some efforts. We have to try. We have to have the right motivations. You know, we're not doing this to become famous or to get rich or even to escape from life. And when we try those things, we actually, get further and further away from satisfaction. But we make the effort, and through doing it over and over, we start to understand that our capacity is big. That the limits that we think we have are really created by our minds. It's not to say that we have to force ourselves to do things that our bodies or our minds are not ready to do. That's also part of understanding the flow. Sometimes we just need to rest and take a step backwards instead of constantly striving. I think actually I brought this story I wanted to share. It's not exactly a story, but it's one of my teachers in Japan spoke one evening, and I guess it is a story. He shared this story, and I wanted to translate it for somebody who was there, so I have it written down. So I'm going to share this, and that will be the last thing I share today. So he was telling us about a Dharma friend of his, a monk. The monk ordained when he was 14, and then he practiced for 30 years with the same teacher before he realized that the practice he was doing wasn't helpful for him. So then after wandering from place to place, he came to find a new teacher. However, no matter how much he searched, it didn't make a difference. He still had doubts, and he was still suffering. Even though his situation was different, he felt his confusion and his doubts growing. The Buddha said all sentient beings innately have Buddha nature. Mountains, rivers, grasses, and trees all have Buddha nature. And so the friend wondered, if this is so, how can I prove it? And so he sat doing zazen, practicing, following the breath, getting caught up in all the details. He practiced for many, many years, and he met many wise people, but he kept coming up against his own question, and he couldn't find an answer. Why do we have doubts and confusion? Where do these come from? So finally, the friend understood. He understood that this practice every day, in all parts of the day, this is the way. This is practice. And he practiced even more diligently from then on. And he never slept lying down. His ideas about the future fell away, and he practiced so hard that he broke his tooth. And then he came to the teacher and he said, I broke my tooth from trying too hard, and still I can't dispel my doubts. In the past, he had loved to drink sake, and he quit. And he only wanted to practice zazen. He practiced and practiced and practiced until finally he understood clearly. Everyone has thoughts. Always continue in the state you are in now, and then you'll understand your own future. Take one step at a time. Why are you confused? Everything that arises falls away. All sentient beings innately have Buddha nature or okayness. All beings are innately okay. Why do we forget this? Through our diligent effort, through just showing up and showing up and showing up, even when it's hard, even when it's easy, even when we're angry or when we're sad or when we're happy, showing up and making diligent efforts is how we understand the way. This is one of the 8 awarenesses of great beings. So I hope we will all make diligent efforts. If you monks, the Buddha said, if you monks practice diligence, nothing will be difficult. Thank you.